There was a Tuesday morning in November. I remember it was a Tuesday because my accountant had called on a Monday night and I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling. When I sat in my car in the parking lot of a federal courthouse and I could not make myself open the door. 61 years old, 30 years of building something from nothing, and I was about to walk inside and tell a judge that I had failed completely. I am 55 now. Wait, no, I get that wrong every time. I am 63. I filed at 61, and sometimes my brain still hasn't caught up to the math of what happened. That's what a collapse like this does to your sense of time. You get stuck in the moment it all fell apart, and every number after that feels provisional, like it might still be taken from you. Let me tell you what nobody tells you about being a successful man for 3 decades. Success is a very effective way to avoid self-knowledge. Every quarter that ended in the black was just another layer of armor, another reason to skip the uncomfortable question of whether I actually knew what I was doing or whether I was just coasting. I confused profit with wisdom for 30 years. I genuinely could not tell the difference. And I think a lot of men my age, men who built something real, men who have the calluses and the gray hair to prove they worked for it, I think a lot of us made the same mistake without knowing it. My business was a commercial real estate consulting firm based out of Charlotte. We had 14 employees at our peak in 2018, solid contracts, and I had personally negotiated deals that put food on tables for a lot of families, including my own. I was not reckless. That is the part that still gets me. I was not some gambler. I was methodical and careful and experienced, and I still drove us straight off a cliff because I was so certain I understood the market that I stopped actually watching it. The world shifted underneath my feet, and I was the last person in the room to notice. By the time I noticed, the damage was done. Chapter 7 was filed on November 14th, 2021. I know the date the way you know the birthday of someone you loved and lost. The house went, the LLC dissolved, the retirement accounts I had not yet sheltered correctly, gone. At 61 years old, I had a net worth that a 23-year-old fresh out of college would have looked at and felt sorry for. But here's the thing that surprised me, and I want to say this carefully because I don't want it to sound like I'm wrapping a bow on something that was genuinely devastating. The money was not the worst part. The money hurt, but it was not the thing that nearly killed me. What nearly killed me was watching my social circle evaporate in about 3 weeks. I had a guy in my life, I'll call him Randall, which is close enough to his real name. Randall and I had played golf together for 11 years. We had been to each other's kids' weddings. I had lent him money once, 20 years ago, and never mentioned it again because that's the kind of friendship I thought we had. When the bankruptcy became public knowledge, Randall called me once, left a message that said something like, "Hey man, thinking of you. Let me know if you need anything." And I never heard from him again. I called back twice. Nothing. And Randall was not the exception. Randall was the rule. There's actually a statistic that I came across later, one of those numbers that lands like a punch when you read it, that says around 70% of business owners over 50 who go through bankruptcy report losing their entire professional social circle within 6 months. I lost mine in 3 weeks. The dinner invitations dried up. The guys who always wanted to talk deals, always wanted my read on the market, always seemed so interested in what I was doing. They just went quiet, like someone had hit mute on my entire life. I used to be bitter about that. I'm not anymore. What I understand now is that those relationships were not built on me. They were built on access, on utility, on what my proximity could do for someone else. And when I hit zero, I finally got an honest audit of which connections were real and which ones were just transactions dressed up as friendship. It cost everything to find that out, but I found it out. What I almost could not find my way back from was what the collapse did inside my own house. My wife Karen and I had been married for 31 years when the filing happened. 31 years. This woman had built a life alongside me, raised 2 kids with me, moved cities with me twice, trusted me with our financial security through 3 decades, and now she was sitting across the kitchen table from a man she did not fully recognize. I could not sleep. I would wake up at 2 in the morning doing math in my head, running the same numbers over and over, like if I calculated it enough times, the answer would change. I flinched every time my phone rang. I stopped making eye contact in conversations because I was so consumed by the internal wreckage that I couldn't stay present in any room I was in. Karen told me something about 6 weeks in that I think about almost every day. She said, "I didn't marry your company, but right now I feel like I'm grieving it with you, and I can't tell if you even notice I'm here." That sentence hit me harder than any number the accountant had ever shown me. We almost didn't make it through. I say that plainly because I think men my age need to hear it said plainly. Almost half of couples who go through a major financial crisis after 50 end up separating. I know that now. I knew nothing of the sort when we were in it. I just knew we were 2 people in the same house who would stop talking about anything real because everything real was either terrifying or shameful. We went to counseling. That's not a comfortable sentence for me to say. A 61-year-old man who spent 30 years being the person other people came to for answers, sitting in a therapist's office trying to figure out how to talk to his own wife. But we did it, and it saved the marriage. I will not stand here and tell you it was romantic or easy, because it wasn't either of those things. We stayed. That's the whole story. We chose to stay and do the work. Here is something I learned from all of it that I think is genuinely important for anyone who is starting over after 50 and who keeps hitting a wall they can't explain. The rebuild doesn't start with a spreadsheet. It doesn't start with a new business plan or a new credit score or a new strategy. It starts with something the financial recovery industry almost never talks about. It starts with the work of separating your self-worth from your net worth. And for men of our generation, that separation is not easy because we were never taught how to do it. We were taught that what you earn is what you are, that your title and your balance and your ability to provide are the same thing as your value as a person. And when those external markers disappear, when the second act starts without a script, you are suddenly standing in a room with a version of yourself you have never met before, and you don't know if you can trust him. I couldn't trust him at first. I spent about 4 months thinking I was the problem, that I was fundamentally broken in some way, that the success had just been covering up. Financial therapists actually have a name for what I went through. They call it identity collapse, and they say it hits hardest between 45 and 60 because that's when the fusion between who you are and what you earn is at its most complete. What I know now is that the man standing in that parking lot who couldn't open the car door, that man was not broken. He was just finally being honest for the first time in years. A friend of mine, one of the real ones who actually stayed, told me about SCORE. For anyone who doesn't know, SCORE is a nonprofit resource run through the Small Business Administration that pairs you with retired executives and former business leaders who volunteer their time to mentor people who are rebuilding. I had never heard of it in 30 years of running a business. I walked in there expecting to feel embarrassed, and the embarrassment was real. I won't pretend otherwise. There is something specifically painful about being a man who spent 3 decades as the person others looked to for advice, and then sitting across a table asking for help. But the mentor I was paired with was a 72-year-old former CFO named Gerald. Quiet man, terrible coffee in that office. He looked at my numbers for about 20 minutes and then looked up at me and said 3 words. He said, "This is fixable. Not easy, not quick, fixable." And something in me that had been locked up for months just opened. Over 11 million small business owners have used SCORE. The entire thing is free. I tell every man I meet who is going through reinvention after bankruptcy or financial recovery over 50 to start there before they do anything else. Not because of the tactics, though the tactics are solid, but because of the thing Gerald gave me in that conference room. He gave me the permission to believe the story wasn't over. The financial rebuild after Chapter 7 is slow, and I want to be honest about that. Rebuilding credit after Chapter 7 takes time, real time, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But it moves. If you keep showing up, it moves. I got a secured card with a $500 limit and treated it like a mortgage. 13 months later, I had a real card. 24 months later, my score had climbed enough that I could start looking at restructuring what remained. The retirement piece was the one that looked the most impossible when I first ran the numbers. I was 61 with almost nothing set aside in a protected account. But here is what my financial advisor showed me. And I say my financial advisor, knowing that admitting I hired one is me admitting my ego used to not allow that. There is a mechanism called the solo 401k with catch-up contributions that lets anyone over 50 put away an extra $7,500 per year beyond the standard limits. That number changes slightly by year, but the principle is the same. Late start retirement planning is not a fairy tale if you run it correctly. It is slower than if you had started at 30, yes. The math is harder, yes. But a man who begins rebuilding at 61 with discipline and honesty about what he can actually do, that man can still retire with enough. Not with the mansion, not with the portfolio I had imagined at the top, with enough, with dignity. And I think for a while I could not accept enough because I had spent 30 years measuring myself against a number that was always supposed to be bigger. Enough felt like surrender. It doesn't anymore. There is a guy I want to tell you about because he represents the other path, the one I almost took. His name was Martin. I met Martin at a SCORE seminar about 8 months into my own rebuild. Martin had gone through something similar, slightly earlier, filed at 58. But Martin could not get out from under the shame of it. Every conversation circled back to what he used to have. He would describe his old office, the corner suite, the view, the way people stood up a little straighter when he walked in the room. He could not release it. He was so anchored to who he had been that he had no energy left to build who he was going to be. Last I heard, Martin is renting a room from his daughter, and he's still spending most of his time on LinkedIn, trying to reconnect with people who made Randall look loyal by comparison. Second act career planning requires letting go of the first act. You cannot sprint forward while your hands are still gripping what's behind you. If you are in it right now, if you are somewhere in that tunnel between the filing and the first real breath of air on the other side, I want you to hear this. The terms starting over after 50, or second act career, or reinvention after bankruptcy, those are not soft motivational phrases. They are real categories of real men's real lives. And there is more company in this experience than you think. The silence around financial failure at our age is not because it doesn't happen. It's because most of us are too proud to say it out loud. I am saying it out loud because I spent too long in the parking lot that Tuesday morning, and I don't want you to spend any longer than necessary in yours. My 401k is growing. It is a fraction of what it was at the peak. And if I am being honest, I still wake up some nights and do the math. That hasn't stopped completely. The old shame still flares up sometimes, like a muscle that remembers an old injury, even after it's healed. There is still a version of me that flinches when someone asks how the business is going. There is still grief in the gap between what I thought this decade was going to look like and what it actually looks like. I don't think that fully goes away, and I've stopped trying to make it. But I look in the mirror now, and I don't need a balance sheet to recognize the man looking back. That took 61 years of getting it wrong and one catastrophic failure to learn. I just wish someone had been honest with me 20 years ago about the difference between building wealth and building a life, because the two are not the same thing. And I spent 30 years treating them like they were. The bankruptcy was not the end. It was the first honest chapter. If any of this sounds like your life right now, or like someone you love, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are in it. The parking lot, the courthouse, the slow climb back. Wherever you are, I want to hear it. And if this helped you at all, share it with one person who needs it. You probably already know who that person is. Subscribe if you want to keep going. We've got more road to cover.